This is a very simple question. If God created everything, if God created the space-time continuum, what created God? If God created everything, that is, if God created the space-time continuum, what created God? If God created everything, if God created everything, if God created the space-time continuum, that is, if God created the space-time continuum, what created God? What created God?
Christians do not believe that God created everything. He created everything other than himself. He didn't create himself. So God is an uncreated being. As Rodney indicated so nicely in his speech, the concept of God that is traditional in Christian theology is that God is a necessary being, not a contingent being. That is to say, God exists in all possible worlds. It is metaphysically impossible that he fail to exist. So God is the uncaused first cause of everything other than himself.
It's not much of a definition for God.
Well, I wasn't offering a definition of God. I was just offering one of the many attributes of God. That I would also say things like God is omnipotent, omniscient, exists self-existently, is eternal, is morally perfect, and so forth. There are many, many attributes that will round out and give you a very theologically rich concept of God. But it's important to see that in Christian thinking, traditionally, God isn't a contingent being. That is to say, a being that just happens to exist. God just doesn't happen to exist. He's metaphysically necessary. He's a self-existent being. His existence, his non-existence is impossible. So that would answer the question then, well, what is God's cause, or where did God come from? Christians don't believe that everything that exists has a cause, because we think that God is uncaused and metaphysically necessary. In my arguments for the existence of God, I word the causal premise this way: everything that begins to exist has a cause. Anything that comes into being needs to have a cause. But an eternal, metaphysically necessary being is just uncaused.
You'll notice that the way the first premise of our cosmological argument is phrased, it is not that everything must have a cause, which may invoke this question you ask of, well, if God caused the universe and everything needs a cause, then what caused him? Rather, it is everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in some external cause. And the arguments that we've given and the definition of God that we're working with as well is that God is by definition this necessary being, the uncaused cause of all other reality. So to ask what caused that being which is by definition uncaused is to ask a malformed propositional statement, I think.
In fact, the whole who made God argument doesn't get them anywhere anyway. Let me illustrate it this way. Suppose I were to ask you who wrote this book. You would tell me Richard Dawkins. Suppose I looked back at you and I said, that's not good enough. Who made Richard Dawkins? You'd go, well, that doesn't bear on the question at all. Even if I don't know who made Richard Dawkins, I can know that he made this book, right? You don't need to know who made the Creator to know who made the universe. The Creator made the universe. Whether or not he was created is another question. He wasn't, but it's an irrelevant question to who made the universe.
This question, who created God, or all right, what is God's cause? I've heard so many college sophomores ask this question as though this is the sort of knockdown argument that destroys theism. And it's just based on a misunderstanding. Look at the first premise. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. That is to say, something cannot come into being out of nothing. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. But if something exists eternally, if it never comes into being, then it doesn't need a cause. And this is what the atheist has always said about the universe. This isn't special pleading for God. The atheist has typically said the universe is eternal and uncaused, and therefore there doesn't need to be anything beyond it. The problem is, philosophical argument and scientific evidence now make that improbable. So God, the answer is a timeless being beyond space and time, necessary in his existence, didn't have a beginning, and therefore is the first uncaused cause. So the question is really, what is the cause of the first uncaused cause? You know, which is sort of like asking about the name of the married bachelor's wife. You know, it just is meaningless.